Welcome to the Off the Charts Football Podcast. I'm Matt Manocherian, joined as always by Mark Simon and our producer, Justin Stein. Today we've got a very special guest. Hayden Winks from Underdog Fantasy is with us, and we're going to break down all things NFL draft related.
Hayden Winks of Underdog Fantasy joins us. You know him from his work on YouTube and podcasting and with Underdog Fantasy Sports. We like him because he puts our data to use like few others do. Hayden, I guess, first of all, anyone that listens to this podcast hears us frequently over and over again extol the virtues of the different content that we offer right now. The NFL Draft website that we have got going, nfldraft.sportsinfosolutions.com. What are some of your, let's get the idea of a power user here. What are some of your favorite things about some of our offerings?
Well, it really is just the customization. I can get the basic stats. I use like age and stuff, but if I'm trying to find where players are actually going to be winning on the football field, that's where the formations matter, third downs matter for the quarterbacks. Are they taking 5-step drops? Are they taking 3-step drops? Is it all RPO production? For wide receivers, it's not just to me, like I can find where the slot rates are, how often a wide receiver is playing in the slot. I can't find anywhere else if they're being isolated. Are they playing on third downs? Are they playing in 2 wide receiver sets? And for me, for fantasy football, that's super important. Some of the archetype of players, just for my evaluation, if they're not playing in 3 wide receiver sets, they're just not going to be that productive. Baseline stats, like how productive they were in college, are helpful, but they're not going to tell me the exact role. And then when we're doing mock drafts and NFL draft props, it's like those little details that you just can't find anywhere else.
So you just said something interesting to me. Productivity in 3 wide receiver sets. That's a specific indicator for you. Like if you're on and one of 2 wide receivers on the field, anybody can produce. When there's 3 guys and you're still commanding that kind of volume, that's an indicator.
Yeah. So there was one research I did using your guys' information, and it was looking at yards per route run, which is one of the stats that fantasy football uses a lot. But what I was noticing is like someone like Corey Davis on the Titans, his yards per route run was awesome. But it makes sense to me if you're only one of 2 wide receivers on the field, your yards per route run is going to be higher because you're only competing against whether that's a fullback or that blocking tight end. You're just not going to throw the ball to those types of receivers. So I think that there was like a little bit of overinflating the yards per route run for wide receivers. So I was looking at, all right, what's your yards per route run in 3 wide receiver sets when you're actually competing against other pass catchers that demand targets? And for fantasy in particular, I just care if you're playing in 2 wide receiver sets. If you're the 3rd wide receiver, but you're not playing in the red zone, that doesn't really help me all that much. There's like less of a ceiling to chase. So For like the prospects, someone like Wan'Dale Robinson, who might be interesting as like a 3rd or 4th receiver, he'll never be fantasy relevant because he's not big enough, doesn't play on the outside enough to be a 2 wide receiver set starter. And I need touchdowns in fantasy. If you're not playing in 2 wide receiver sets, your just upside's pretty capped.
Right. You're not getting in those opportunities. That's really interesting. Is that a reason to be high on like Jerry Jeudy this year? I feel like he had to compete with more receivers for targets than last year than he will this coming year.
Yeah. There's also like just like what type of offense are they running out there? If he's going to be a slot receiver or an outside wide receiver, he's fascinating to me because he hasn't been all that good in the NFL, but he was still a young, great prospect. So I want to believe, and I'm very curious how like Russell Wilson's going to view him. I like him kind of playing in that like Devontae Adams role where they can get him on some bubble screens and stuff as well. I'm curious how they're going to deploy him. It's interesting because they paid Tim Patrick so much money. I'm not sure if KJ Hamler's going to play all that much after his injury, but Cortland Sutton and Tim Patrick are like very unique skill sets, very different from Jerry Jeudy.
Yeah, that should be interesting. I can't wait to see how their offense looks. That'll be one of the most fun things. Open the gifts on week 1.
I like how you brought up the idea of the data to help you win. That's kind of a theme of this company. So your take on that definitely falls right in line. And let's stay with wide receivers, by the way. NFL Draft, you've got Drake London as your wide receiver 1. We have him as wide receiver 6. But our scouting rankings don't have a big gap between 1 and 6. And the advanced metrics like him a lot, which Matt can certainly talk about. But Hayden, why are you so high on Drake London?
And my model, which kind of takes in production, age, how good your college team was. Were you a good recruit? Are you declaring early, which just means that the NFL thinks that you're good enough to go out there? I mean, he's supposed to go high. So in my model, he comes out as a 97th percentile prospect. Now, I understand that why there's so much debate because He's not necessarily the greatest speedster. He's not going to be separating 15 yards downfield, but he's a unique profile because he's so big and he is so good at those contested catches. But they threw him like 3.75 screens per game. I think I got that from your guys' data. And you just don't really see that type of usage where you have a contested catch receiver that also is demanding targets underneath. And I think that he was a little more fluid than some people were getting credit for. Now, he's not going to run a 4.45 speed, but I see somebody maybe closer to like Michael Thomas, Devontae Adams at like his peak, where you're giving him the ball because he's a little more fluid for a pretty big wide receiver.
Yeah, he and Treylon Burks is our top guy. Really different players, but both of them big body, contested catch guy. They do have that kind of part in common. But I think if you watch them play, that's maybe where the similarities end. There's a lot different about them too. You mentioned talking about performance out wide versus in the slot before. That's one thing that jumps out statistically with Drake London is that he was third amongst receivers in this class in total points per game out wide, and just 23rd from the slot. I think that's a positive indicator. I mean, what's there to like? He's big. He's got all kinds of production. He commands targets. He catches the ball when it's thrown his way. He's productive from the outside. There's a lot to like there. He's not a great separator. But Mark, I need to start zapping you every time you do the need-based drafting thing or the position ranking thing, because he's the 6th ranked wide receiver. But I mean, the top ranked wide receiver is a 6.9 and he's a 6.8. So I mean, we're talking about those guys really are bunched in together. It's not like a imaginary thing.
Matt, when we rewind the tape, you'll note that I said there was not a big gap between number 1 and number 6.
All right. No zap.
I got a question for you, just if I can jump in. We have the same exact. We're seeing the same things. I actually have Treylon Burks as my 6th wide receiver. I gave him an early round 2 grade. I think that the difference I was noting is Treylon Burks, while he has the size of a prototypical X receiver, he was, I think, like 18% out wide. A lot of it was backfield touches. And he was absolutely dominant when he was the isolated receiver, when he was facing man coverage. We're talking about like 27 routes, 37 routes in those particular instances. I see it a little bit, you have to kind of project a little bit more with Treylon Burks compared to Drake London. The other thing with Treylon is like Dane Brugler and some of the other insiders were noting that he's playing like 240 pounds. He's only 6'2". Like that seems like we're getting a little bit too far out. I like the body type of Drake London a little bit more, but it's very interesting. We're seeing the same exact things, but we have the rankings kind of flipped here.
Yeah, no, and I think you're spot on there. I think when you talk about Burks, if Deebo Samuel never happened, and there's a whole other news story for today we could talk about, but if that never happened, then I think he wouldn't be, the stock wouldn't be as high. But I do think that what's attractive about him is he was in that Arkansas offense where they do bubblegum crap and did a bunch of RPOs and nothing imaginative to get the ball in his hands. And part of I think there'll be an on-ramp with Burks because you're going to have to teach him a full route tree and things like that he didn't have to do. And he's not going to be a deep threat, but the ability to get him the ball in the backfield, to just hand the ball off to him on a jet sweep and what he can do with the ball in his hands. Now we start to get into like a positional value thing. Like, should you devalue him? Because that's a little bit running back-ish. But I would take the argument that these versatile weapons where if we can get them the ball in their hands, they're going to do good things for our offense. That is something that I think is valuable.
I like the debate. Hayden, was there another one where we were significantly different from you?
The other player that I keep going back and forth with, and it's not going to help us with any of the data, is George Pickens, because he hasn't played the last 2 years. I look back at his freshman stats, and he led the team in yards and touchdowns per game. 5-star pedigree, has the kind of size profile we're looking at. He was at a 52 percentile athlete in my model, but I think just the argument for George Pickens is if you're right about George Pickens and you draft him around like the round 1-2 turn, like you have an X receiver. And like a lot of these players we're talking about, Sky Moores, Chris Olave's, they're good prospects in their own right, but it's kind of those secondary positions. And if you're right on George Pickens, he's an X receiver. The problem is just like there's very little tape to go off of. I'm not sure there's anything in particular you guys saw with him because he's like somebody I'm debating. I currently have him as my wide receiver 5. I don't know if I want to be super aggressive in fantasy. The upside case is if he somehow lands Chiefs and the Packers both need X receivers. And if he can somehow go to those teams instead of one of the worst teams in the early second round, that'd be pretty big for fantasy.
Yeah, he's right in that same bunch for us. He's at that 6.8 final grade, our 4th ranked receiver overall. I think he's a good candidate at that part of the draft. you pointed out 2019 is really the last time we saw him play significantly. He was really good that year. Again, another guy who did a lot of his damage from out wide. That's a huge indicator. I can tell based on just the way you talk about the X wide receiver. And then on top of that, this is somebody who ran deep routes 44% of the time that year. So this is a guy, he's running the 7, 8, and 9. You know what you're getting. You know what the threat that you're putting on the defense is. He's big and he's fast. So like you said, if that's a hit, then that's a great, that's big time right there.
Yeah, I think I'm going to be all in for fantasy. Like that, 44% of your routes are going downfield and you're not coming off the field. Like that's how you can have like a top 15 fantasy wide receiver season.
You mocked 7 wide receivers going in the first round, if I'm not mistaken. And it feels like every year there are more and more getting drafted high. Why do you think that it is?
Well, I think the passing offenses have completely changed. Teams are playing at faster pace. The neutral pass rates are up, so you need more wide receivers. The wide receivers are coming in and they seem to be performing better earlier on. I think that there's something with high school 7-on-7. I think there's something going on with college. And I think that for the NFL draft in particular, we already have Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, maybe Deebo Samuel. These wide receivers want to get paid. And if their team's not going to pay them, they're willing to demand a trade. So I think that there's more value just looking at the contracts, kind of like the same thing with the quarterbacks. Once the veteran contracts balloon up, then you have to go look in the NFL draft. And I just think that teams need a legit number 3 wide receiver. And they're
a starter now, right?
Yeah, they're an absolute starter. And you need different types of wide receivers. And that's why like someone like Sky Moore, Jahan Dotson, maybe they're not number 1 receivers. So they wouldn't be super valued 5-10 years ago, but a good number 2 receiver is still very important. Chris Olave, who I think maxes out as a really good number 2 receiver, you can still justify like the 16th overall pick with him because a really good number 2 receiver still matters a ton for your offense.
Yeah, I wonder if the same way we talk about now, like you got to win on your rookie contract with a quarterback, we might start talking about that with receivers if they keep getting paid like they were this year. It's been crazy as far as that goes. You brought up like a lot of really good points there about why this has happened. I love going back, like the 7-on-7s is nuts. When scouting 10 years ago, it was the sort of like the dawn of the spread offense. And people all thought the spread meant passing, but the spread oftentimes meant like we're going to hand it off and run bubble screens all the time and stuff like that. Now, all of a sudden, with the development, it's not we have to wait until their 3rd season to see what they're going to be as a receiver. It is they're going to come in and produce a lot of the time. You see Jamar Chase helped his team go to the Super Bowl. I think you're spot on when you talk about how that value has changed in the NFL. And I wonder if like we might be peaking on like one side of the pendulum swing now and might be coming back in time. Like the positional value feel like it swung so hard towards wide receivers. We might be at the peak there.
And even if they're not fully developed, the NFL coaches, for it seems like the first time in a long time, are willing to give them some of the manufactured touches that was like very college style. Like we're above that, like not anymore. Like the Sean McVay types, Shanahan, they're going to get the ball into space. LaFleur, the same thing. The manufactured touches. Yep, exactly. So I think that those manufactured touches, even if a player isn't fully developed, like Treylon Burks, where I might be wrong ranking him as my wide receiver 6 because I see a couple steps before he becomes that true number 1 receiver. Well, if he goes to, let's say, the Packers at 22nd overall, I know there's bubble screens because they threw Devontae Adams a million of them. And I think that he would be electric in that. So I think that even if there is a development in this NFL, you can at least manufacture them some touches.
Since he came up again, should we go back to Deebo? What did you make of the Deebo trade request?
I think it makes sense. I think he just doesn't want to get tackled that much in the backfield. Like, there's a reason why running backs get paid the way they do, and there's a reason why wide receivers get paid, and he wants to get paid like a wide receiver, and he doesn't want to take, 50 extra hits up the middle. And it makes total sense. I wouldn't want to do that if I was Deebo Samuel. He already showed in the first half of the season when he wasn't in the Deebo Samuel role, he was actually just winning outside and was a massive yards after the catch threat. And I think I was looking at one of the other things I use is your guys' downfield catches. His catchable ball rate and the catches he was making downfield was amazing, leading the league in downfield catches. And you don't really think of Deebo Samuel doing that, but that's where a lot of the value is just get him going downfield. He's just such an electric player. So I don't blame him. Like I don't want to be playing running back if I'm Deebo Samuel. I'm already good at the position that's more valuable. I don't want to be playing that position.
That's really interesting. When I was with the Saints, we had a Jimmy Graham contract dispute because it was where is he to get franchised at? Is he a tight end? Is he a wide receiver? It seems like a different version of kind of that same problem. I wonder if Cordarrelle Patterson's going to be speaking to his agent after listening to the podcast today.
Absolutely.
So we've talked here for 15 minutes. We haven't talked about the quarterbacks yet. I'm curious, and I think I know where you're going to go with this, but is there a stat from our collection that you find particularly useful when trying to assess specifically this quarterback draft class?
So, I mean, I look at like the basic stats like EPA and all that stuff, but first of all, I want to see how accurate quarterbacks are, and clean pockets is how you figure that out. It's not just the catchable ball rate in clean pockets. I'm also looking at average depth of target in clean pockets. I want aggressive passers. I don't want people to check the ball down, especially if I'm drafting them in the first round. So those are like the two obvious things. And then just looking just to get, especially in this class, like, are you a 3-step drop quarterback? Is it all RPOs? Those type of things matter. But I think that the pressure rates, the sack rates, all those secondary stats really paint a good picture. And to me, there's like different buckets of these quarterbacks. I don't have high grades on any of them, but I think in some offenses, they're going to really be able to succeed. In other offenses, they would have no chance. But to me, it's just the catchable ball rate in pockets and how aggressive you are, kind of the two ones I'm looking at the most.
Where do you stand on Willis Pickett at all?
It's not as fun, but I'm on team Kenny Pickett. And I think a lot of the people just like the upside of Malik Willis. And obviously, like, there's some absurd stats I found. There was one, his catchable ball rate in clean pockets was at 83% on sideline passes. And then over the middle is at 82%. So he was more accurate throwing the deep ball on the perimeter, which makes no sense. You never see that. But at the same time, he doesn't throw the ball over the middle ever, which is like the anti-Lamar Jackson. And historically, throwing the ball over the middle is a higher EPA, it's just a more efficient way to throw the ball. But at the same time, he has the arm strength to make those throws. So I'm on team Kenny Pickett just because he was like top 10 in accuracy. His EPA per play was much better. He's a little bit older, which matters less at the quarterback position versus other positions, just because, well, first of all, it's harder to get onto the field as a freshman because there's usually a quarterback in place. There's a lot of development. So it's such a mental position that it just takes a lot of reps. And Kenny Pickett was like 94th percentile in EPA as a quarterback among drafted quarterbacks since 2005. So I have a mid to late round 1 grade, kind of take advantage of that rookie contract. And Malik Willis, like, I understand it. I can see it, but it's just not for me. His numbers were too bad, unfortunately.
Yeah, they're both at that 6.6 grade range for us, which is not an ideal starting level grade. But like you said, it couldn't be more different in terms of you want somebody that's going to come in right now and play for you. It would be really fun if Kenny Pickett went to the Steelers, right? Just stayed in the same facility, never even had to just go in the other door, basically. Is the way it works when you're there. Matt Pitt / the Pittsburgh Steelers. But then Malik Willis, I don't think he has a chance of being a playoff level quarterback, let alone Super Bowl level, starting level, like you're comfortable with him on a week in, week out basis this year. That said, if you're willing to bet on like the Josh Allen trajectory, all of the physical tools that make you drool are there. It's not every day that you see a quarterback that makes you think of Michael Vick. Like I said, back when I used to play Madden and I was unstoppable. That the upside is there because it's not just that he's a runner and an athlete. The arm talent's really good. It's just he's so inconsistent that the stat like you brought up, that can actually happen, which would never happen to most quarterbacks.
The other stat in Malik Willis, I was watching, I think it was Ole Miss, and then he played another Power 5 team. And what they ended up doing is they would just end up rushing 3 or 4 and play a lot of zone coverage. And it was absolutely shredding Malik Willis. He had no idea where to throw the ball. So I looked it up, and you guys, out of 109 college quarterbacks in points earned per play against 4 or fewer pass rushers, he was 105th out of 109. That's worrisome because that's what we see with a lot of the dual threat quarterbacks in the NFL is they're like, all right, fine. We're going to put a spy linebacker on you, play some zone coverage. And if you're not willing to take the check down or be able to seam the ball in really accurately, it's going to be tough. And I don't like to see any quarterback 105th out of 109. I don't care how niche the stat is I'm pulling. Like that's pretty brutal. And I'm worried that if that's all it takes to stop him, that I'm pretty worried.
Is there a quarterback team scenario draft wise where you would actually say, hey, yeah, I like that. That's one that I'm really into moving forward.
It would have to be a team like, I don't know if it's the Titans where they keep Ryan Tannehill and then they completely redshirt him. But to me, I end up comping him to like a poor man's Justin Fields. Like Justin Fields his numbers were great in college. He's bigger. Maybe Malik Willis a little bit better of a rusher than Justin Fields, but same type of body type. I don't really fully see the Josh Allen comparison just because Josh Allen's 6'5", 237.
Right.
Willis
Totally
is
different in
6
that
foot.
regard. Yeah.
Yes. And even I was looking at passing EPA in their final seasons. Josh Allen was at 48th percentile among drafted quarterbacks. Malik Willis is at 17th. So like this huge projection, like Josh Allen was way ahead of Malik Willis. And if you just look at the quarterbacks that are drafted with like below 30th percentile passing EPA, like that's where you find like your Jake Lockers and those type of quarterbacks. So he would be a statistical outlier. I see why somebody would make that bet. Ultimately, I don't want to be the team making that bet. I think that there's a lot of steps that he has to take, and I just think it's a little bit too late. He's a redshirt senior, so he couldn't get on the field at Auburn. So another team, I'm rooting for him. I think I would be on the Kenny Pickett side of it.
Yeah, he's Justin Fields minus all the production that Justin Fields has, which was a lot of production.
And we're still waiting to see if Justin Fields is going to pay off. I hope he does.
Right. I wouldn't take either of these quarterbacks or any quarterback in that draft. Really, like I think there are so many players that maybe there's not the high end talent, but there are a lot of quality starting level players. We talked about all the receivers, the corners, the pass rushers. There's like 5 more dynamic pass rushers than there was really one last year in the draft that was super dynamic as it turned out. But yeah, so I wouldn't be excited about either of them. But if I did have to bet on the upside, that's all it is. It's the upside. And it's not that he would be Josh Allen. It's that he would have to have a similar curve to Josh Allen. And I do think the upside, the picture in your head has to be Michael Vick, because to me that if that's not the picture in your head when you think about why I would want Malik Willis, then I don't know what you're thinking about.
Where do you personally differ from consensus on some of the top 10 potential guys on a big board?
Well, I mean, I haven't talked to Kayvon Thibodeau, but I fear that the Kayvon Thibodeau downside risk is just because the draft season is so long and just like we overthink things. But he was such a dominant player as a true freshman. And the biggest things that I'm looking at for my model is, did you declare early? Were you young? Did you come from a Power 5 school? A lot of times you were a 5-star or 4-star pedigree, and he had all the production. He tested like not like a crazy great athlete, but certainly good enough. And I think that he kind of has the frame to add some weight. So I'm not sure if I would put him first overall, but I don't see a big difference between Aiden Hutchinson and Kayvon Thibodeau where their projection is supposed to be. They don't win in the same ways, but I think that I'm higher on Kayvon Thibodeau. I don't really buy a lot of the narrative stuff. The second you start getting into the narrative business, I kind of want to be selling that.
Yeah, I buy 0% of the narrative on Kayvon Thibodeau. I don't know him or Aiden Hutchinson personally, so I can't comment on any of that stuff. Both of them come across pretty clean on our injury risk flags going for the future. We have it with Hutchinson at the 7.0 grade level, Thibodeau at the 6.9 grade level. So you're talking about starting level, potential 10 sack guys for both of them. I think it's a little bit like pick your flavor as it comes between them. Hutchinson, a little bit taller, a little bit more in sort of, you've seen him produce and be a productive player with consistency. Thibodeau's been on and off the field a little bit, which I think might give people some pause with him. But you do, like you said, the upside I think is even higher when you talk about what he does. Either way, when you look at the really good stats, expected pressure rate, pressures above expectation, it's the way that we love to look at these guys. They're both top notch in that regard. So I don't think you could go wrong. And I couldn't agree with you more about just like the narrative stuff. It's really weird. What's his name out of Georgia? The narrative there has been weird too. Trayvon Walker.
Yep.
Yeah. The narrative around him and how he's kind of gone up and down the board. That stuff still is a mystery to me.
Yeah, I can't figure out. I was looking at among edge rushers, Trayvon Walker was 5th percentile in tackles for loss. And I've done some research. Tackles for loss is actually more predictive than sacks are. And I think that's just like one of those stats where there are more tackles for loss. So the sample size gets a little bit better, which just means that you're productive when the quarterback, you're like collapsing the pocket. So that's like the stat I look at the most. And he was at 5th percentile. Now, there's a lot of context that comes with Trayvon Walker, just like the way they're utilizing him. And at the end of the day, we're talking about elite athlete, went to Georgia, declared early. He's only 21 years old. So I am willing to roll the dice on him, especially in this class that we're looking for elite talents. I think typically Trayvon probably goes 14th overall in the normal draft. In this draft, like, why not? I'm not seeing like a bunch of superstars. So I can see why someone wants to make the high-end case. I just think that Kayvon Thibodeau would be somebody I would take ahead of him. Just it's a more bankable, more production. I think Kayvon Thibodeau had more production as a true freshman than Trayvon Walker had in his entire career. So I'm gonna roll with Kayvon Thibodeau, maybe the 1st, 2nd, 3rd overall in my top 100.
Yeah, I think Walker's a great athlete. I think he's more of a mid-first round pick. I could see him in the bottom half of the top 10 in a draft where even though Hutchinson and Thibodeau aren't, Chase Young style prospects, I still would have a really hard time when you've got very good athleticism combined with very good production. I can't just bet on traits above that. The one thing that I think is interesting, because you mentioned his usage, that expected pressure rate and pressures above expectation. Trayvon Walker, as much as the stat understands that he was lined up as a 3 technique a bunch of the time, he was moving around inside and all over the place. Even with that context, his pressure rate was below average. It's not like, it was just because he was used in there. Now, he did draw 3 holds this past year. I don't hear a lot of people talking about that when they talk about his lack of production. So I want to be careful because I don't want to make it sound like I'm crushing this guy. I just would have a hard time taking him number 1.
Yeah, I think it just in this class is the debate where like you're just starting to move players up. You're like, okay, this could be a difference maker in all pro. I think that he is one of those types that in theory, but I think typically this player gets drafted 14th overall. I mean, it's just like a bet on traits, but yeah, he's super interesting. He actually came out pretty well in my model because my model really cares about how good your program is. So with Georgia, especially this Georgia team was off the charts good. Early declare, 21 years old. So he still is popping in my model, but you certainly have to coach him up. So it's going to be your own team evaluation if you think that you're going to be able to pull that off.
Shifting from defense to offense, and we don't typically talk, fantasy specific here, but is there someone...
But that's why we got Hayden Winks on today,
right,
Mark.
exactly.
That's right.
So is there someone in this draft where it almost doesn't matter who he goes to, quarterback, running back, receiver, tight end, whatever, where you're like, this is a high-end fantasy guy where he's like a top 5 at his position kind of thing?
Yeah, I think eventually Garrett Wilson will turn into that. We're talking about just like obviously a great wide receiver school, early declare. The production's been on the field. He made Jameson Williams transfer, who turned out to be pretty dang good. Now I get some of the concerns, like with especially compared to Chris Olave, he is not as smooth. He's definitely a little choppy. He oversells routes, but I would rather have that athletic ability and then tell him to turn it off a little bit and clean it up rather than the other way where you just don't have the athleticism. So it might take a couple years, but I see someone that could be like Odell Beckham, like where just like he has like a little bit of juice that most wide receiver prospects don't have. And he was so productive at Ohio State that he's coming out like 97th percentile in my model. I wouldn't be surprised if it took him a little bit. He might be kind of on that Jerry Jeudy path, who was also a dynamic athlete. I think Garrett Wilson's a little more explosive than Jerry Jeudy even, but where overselling routes, it might take a little bit of time to learn at the top of the breaks. But I think that there's just like some special talent with Garrett Wilson. And I kept flipping Garrett Wilson and Drake London on my top as wide receiver.
And a lot of the stats with Garrett Wilson match your eye test. He led the receivers in total points per game this year. 4.1 total points per game is pretty ridiculous. Obviously, the 99 total points rating. He's done most of his work on the outside, second in total points per game from the outside, which I know you like. Catchable catch percent up at 4th. So if the ball was in range where he could get it, he was getting it. And like you said, not the most polished route runner, just 26th in unique routes. So not running, the fully polished and hashed out route tree. But again, broken and missed tackles, get the ball in his hands. He's 3rd in terms of after the catch, that per reception that way. So a lot of things to like there. And I like the Odell comp. That's kind of I wouldn't have thought of that, but I can see where that comes from.
There was one play I can't get out of my head. He was running, I think it was a mesh, or he was just running a basic shallow route, and he caught the ball over the middle of the field, and he ran to the corner of the end zone. Like that acceleration, I was like, I've seen that where in the fantasy we called it ankles and elbows with Odell Beckham. You start seeing those ankles and elbows, and you're not catching him. And I saw that with Garrett Wilson. I also saw the play where he jumped out. This might not have been a couple of years ago where he mossed a defender. He jumped so high. You just don't see those type of plays with everyone else. He just seems like he's built a little bit different. I know he's smaller, but if you can give him a little bit of room, his acceleration seems really next level.
Sometimes it seems like we're just being fans talking about things like, oh my God, he made this highlight reel play. Oh my God, he ran away. But those moments are really important. When you're a scout, you're taught to note when something is like outrageous. It doesn't look like something that other people can do. And you're taught to notice when something looks really easy, when guys make it look really easy. Garrett Wilson and Jameson Williams are the 2 receivers in this draft that I see. They ran away from people, and it looked like they still had 2 more gears.
With Jameson Williams, there was like some balls where he is splitting 2 safeties, And it, like when the ball was in the air, he was able to track it. He had like that extra burst. It was just like, okay, that's like 4.2s. Like that. I think that he probably would have ran like 4.28 or something like that in the combine. He
would have run fast. Yeah. If you're even, he's leaving.
So just in summary, Wilson, Pickett, Thibodeau, and London, guys that you seem to like a good amount.
Yeah. And then George Pickens, I think just is that's the guy I want to kind of attach my name to. Like, he doesn't make sense. A lot of the fantasy community is very production based. And sometimes I think that we lose a little bit of the context, but I think just with him, Power 5-star, it's got that potential that it seems really exciting. I didn't know that 44% deep percentage that you guys said, but that's massive.
Yeah, that's on NFLdraft.sportsinfosolutions.com. That means he's running either a 7, 8, or 9 route. As you know, that would be a post, a corner, or a go route. And yeah, that's all available there, and the people can check that out and get as educated as we are.
And with that, Hayden, we want to give you the opportunity to plug what Underdog Fantasy has in store NFL draft-wise.
So we will have an NFL draft stream. Josh and I are wrapping up mock drafts. My co-host Josh Norris had the best mock draft of all time. Any mock draft ever. He had the best one all time last year. He's trying to defend his title. So we're going through all the beat reporters. And then the second the NFL draft is over, we're going to have a best ball fantasy tournament, probably the biggest one of all time. If you're new to best ball is the way you can play fantasy sports, and you can do a bunch of drafts because you don't have to set your lineups. We take your best performing lineup each week. So if you want to do 150 drafts this summer, you can do it. It's not going to bog down your Tuesday nights. You can go take the wife out. You can go walk your dog on Wednesday night. You just have to play some best ball, and Underdog is the best place to play.
No doubt about that, especially for somebody like me, where I gave up on fantasy football because it was taking up too much of my time and I was focused on this reality football.
Yep.
It's a nice way.
Hayden, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Off the Charts Football Podcast. As a reminder, at Sports Info Solutions, we have other podcasts for the other sports that we cover, basketball and baseball. Don't miss my co-host, Mark Simon, on his SIS Baseball podcast, also produced by the one and only Justin Stein. You can catch that wherever you get podcasts. And more recently, we have Henry Ward's Playing in Space, the SIS Basketball podcast, where he has different guests come on and they discuss basketball through a similar lens to the way that we talk about football here. So it's not just analytics. It's not just scouting. It's what's going on when we look at things by combining the best resources that we have from across all of our toolbox. So you got to listen to that. They're talking about NBA, and some of their NBA playoff discussion has really been interesting as we get into the thick of things for the next, 2 months or so. Don't miss the SIS NFL draft site. It's nfldraft.sportsinfosolutions.com. You'll want to check it out. Check out your team's Sonar page. Check out all of the advanced stats that we have, the same ones that we're talking about here on the podcast with Hayden. For Mark Simon, Justin Stein, I'm Matt Manocherian, and thank you for listening to the Off the Charts Football Podcast.